It's like,
Yes.
yes, I would like to change that now, please. Okay, we
All
are
right.
live. So good evening, everybody. We're
Amazing.
a little bit late, but that's okay. We have KT Hoffman here tonight, all the way from New York.
Yes, I'm
That's
in
right.
Brooklyn.
Okay, I was like,
Yes.
I'm gonna say this, and then I think that's right. But yay!
Yes.
So we
Thank you
figured
for
out our
having
time
me.
zones and our Zoom links and all of that
Yep.
kind of thing. So we're good. We're going. And yeah, I'm gonna pop this into chat since nobody's here quite yet. That if they need to post questions. Okay. That's all written so
Amazing.
people will see it if they pop in. All right, let's start because I'm super excited to talk to KT. Their book or his book came out 6 weeks ago or 4 weeks
Oh
ago.
God.
It's been a little bit.
Yeah, like a little
And
over a month. I don't think I
I
know the
know.
exact.
And when we first tried to make things work out, it like the first dates that we had available didn't work for him
Mhm.
because he was having exciting things happening way back on the East Coast where, I don't know why you would.
I don't know. It's so weird to do events like where I live.
And so we
But
finally made it work in May, but it has been out for a little bit. So yeah. Why don't we
yeah,
start
I'm
out by talking about, so we're talking about the prospects. I don't know if you've got a copy. Since I'm not at work, I don't have one, but maybe you can show the cover.
I'll
A
pretty much
good cover.
always have a copy.
Yay.
All
Which
right.
I got to read as an arc a while back. So that's part of the reason why
Amazing.
I'm very excited to have KT here. But can you just like for people who haven't had a chance to pick it up, haven't had a chance to read
Yeah,
flap copy yet, can you just like give the basically the flap copy version of what the book is about?
absolutely. So The Prospect is a romantic comedy about Gene Ionescu, who is the first trans professional baseball player, and he plays in the minor leagues. And the book opens with his former college teammate, current, like we call him his rival, but in true rom-com fashion, like rival is maybe stretching it.
Yeah.
Gets traded to his minor league team, and so the two get off to like a terrible start together, like can't make a play, can't like hold a civil conversation, and they have to find their way back to like the friendship and comfortable rhythm that they used to have together. And of course, because it's a rom-com, like we might surmise what happens from there. um oh, go ahead.
No,
I wonder.
I can't imagine, but we're not going to tell you. You have to read it for
I
yourself.
love it. I love the way like like you can still be a little coy about romance
I
novels, even though I'm
know.
like, we all like 2 pages in, you're like, I already know. You're like,
Well, and honestly, the funny thing is, like, it reminds me of, reading. I used to when we used to get the newspaper and movie reviews used to be
mhm,
in like the week, like your daily newspaper
yeah,
once a week, and I don't think that's so much true anymore. Um, there would be reviewers that would be, oh, well, this movie wasn't any good because it was predictable, blah 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 blah, and I was like, that's what I want.
I love. Listen, I've
I would
said
be
so
so
many,
upset if it was
right?
unpredictable.
I've said so many, and like maybe this is because like I read maybe one thriller a year. I'm not a real big like twist
Yeah, yeah, me
person.
neither.
I love knowing what's going to happen. Like,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
find it very comforting, even if it's not a romance novel. I love to know kind of where a story's going because then you get to
yeah, yeah,
experience and like enjoy the craft of the way the
yeah,
author is
yeah,
telling the story. And to me, like that's where the real magic happens. So I guess it makes sense that I write romance.
yeah. Well, and I find it interesting. I mean, I'm jumping way ahead. This is not, we'll meander, which is what usually
My
happens with these
favorite,
conversations. It's okay.
my favorite.
I think it's interesting how people, every once in a while we'll get somebody in the store. Most of the time, book people know better, but romance gets a bad rap.
Mhm.
It used to be called women's fiction, which drives me
Yeah.
absolutely bonkers because it's like, I mean, anybody can read it and enjoy it.
Yes.
Books are not gendered. Stop this.
Agreed. Hard
And we
agree.
don't label it that way in the store, but I
Yeah.
suspect we probably did in the past, but not anymore. But I find that interesting because I think that it serves such a comfort role, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And the craft of it is actually like each genre, whether they're sort of high and lit
Yeah.
or they're pulp fiction, or they're
Mhm.
sci-fi or they're, mass market romance or whatever, like each genre has its own art. Like
Absolutely.
you could write really good literary fiction and be really bad at writing romance novels.
Yes.
Like
Yes. I think
so
like I think a lot of literary fiction authors wouldn't be good at writing romance
yeah,
novels. It's a
yeah,
completely different, I
yeah.
mean, not that they couldn't learn. I'm sure like
Well, yeah, but I
talented
think
writers can learn many
yes,
skills, but
yes,
like I I for example took a poetry class when I was in college and I love to read poetry. I think
yeah,
it's
yeah,
beautiful, but it has never been what I tend to write. And I still remember in a class, my professor, like when I had my first one-on-one critique with her, she was like, I can tell you're a writer. Do you usually write prose? I was like, yes. And she goes, I think maybe you're a prose writer. I'm like, that's fair. Like,
Thank you for being kind.
and like, I guess if I had had really big aspirations for being a poet, that would have been heartbreaking.
Yeah, I
But
know.
like, but I think it's very true. Like my skills lie in prose, not in
Yeah,
poetry. And
yeah.
I think sometimes you can learn a new form, but every form of writing has its own
I
like
think
craft
you
concerns.
I think we fall into like I think what you're saying is 100% true. I mean, people can
Yeah.
have genres that they learn to write well, even
Mhm.
if that's, but I do think that people have a tendency to fall into like certain, like I'm a nonfiction writer, and that was not necessarily the plan on the outset,
Yeah.
but that's just how it worked out because that's what I was good at. And so, yeah, and I was going to write fantasy, and I
Yeah.
honestly probably would be terrible at writing fantasy,
I mean,
but
well,
I still like to
first,
read it.
right? I mean, I
Yeah.
would be terrible at writing. I would be absolutely awful at writing fantasy. I'm also like not a confident nonfiction writer. I find it very difficult. So I admire that. But
Yeah,
I
it
actually
is.
like I started out as a historical fiction author. I have written multiple historical fiction. They're not published. So not like I have a big backlist or anything,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I've written a number of historical fiction novels and I feel like I had to learn how to write romance.
yeah,
Like because
yeah,
I didn't know and I didn't grow up reading it a ton. So I very much had that arc
yeah,
with
yeah.
romance and it's hard. It's very hard.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
because there's things that you have to hit,
Yes.
and
And I
and you know, so but back the truck way back up.
okay.
We'll go back big picture again a little bit later, but I
Perfect.
do want to bring it back to the book itself and just talk a little bit about how Jean and Louise came to be, like them as
Yeah.
characters, and we'll talk a little bit more about the setting and the baseball and stuff, but I'm just curious those two characters and sort of the basic outline of the story, like how did that
Yeah.
come to be?
So this book went through like a lot of iterations. It definitely did not, like I said, I started as a historical fiction author. This book definitely didn't start as a romance novel. It started as like a book about baseball, and then I had these two characters who I really loved, and I was like, I want them to have a romantic subplot, and like this is obviously like now that it is a romance this would never be a consideration, but like when I first started writing it I wasn't even 100% sure they were like going to end up together. I was like, I don't know, like they'll have a subplot and we'll
Let's
see
find
what
out.
happens. You know, I am like with first drafts I'm very loosey goosey about my outlining, which I don't like about myself but have had to learn to accept.
Yeah, yeah,
um so it went through so many iterations, but like this book I think was always about Jean. Once I knew I wanted to write like about baseball, I knew I wanted to write about a second baseman and I wanted him to be trans. And I really wanted to write about like both a trans character because at that point I hadn't really read any books with trans men in them. This was in 2018.
yeah,
So
yeah,
before trans characters started showing up even a little bit, I still think it's pretty hard to find, especially in adult fiction.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but I wanted to write a trans character. I wanted him to play second base, which like if we talk about baseball later, I can explain why. But I also just really like second baseman. And then I knew that I wanted his like Gene has always been kind of a more like I don't even want to say like bubbly. I don't consider Gene like super bubbly, but he's very optimistic and he talks a lot. He's really chatty. He gets along with most people, and I really wanted to play him off of a character who also like was extremely kind, but maybe not as like outward facing about it. And so he and Luis were always like very good friends and really understood each other and like filled in each other's gaps in that way that I think is just really special in any like fictional friendship. Yes. And then even more so, like in a fictional romantic relationship is just really satisfying to write about. So the more that I like worked on this book, I was like, oh no, like these two characters are going to end up together. And the more like further I got into drafting, the more I was like, oh, like that's the story. The
Yeah.
story is about them more than it's about any of the baseball that's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. But I
Yeah.
think that those layers have to get layered on
Yeah.
too, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yes.
Because the baseball, am I going to give you if you like baseball and you like romance, you really really need to read this book. I'm just going to say that. And I think the reason for that is like it isn't about baseball, but it is.
It is about, but it
You
is
know what I
about
mean?
baseball. Like, yeah.
It's I think that that's really, and I really like that about this book because
Yeah.
you know, everybody approaches plot and setting in a different way. And every rom-com does that, right? Like
Yes.
sometimes the plot and the setting is really, really important, and sometimes it's just kind of window dressing for what's
Yep.
happened, and both can serve the story just as well. Like that's not good or bad
Absolutely.
either way. But I think for this book, like there's just as much of a love of baseball in the book, and
Yeah.
there's so much of that that if you're at all a fan, like I haven't watched baseball in years, and I'm like, gee, maybe I should watch again.
I'm like,
So, I grew up
meanwhile, I'm over here
listening
like,
to it, not watching it, but
yeah.
like my sister was a big fan, and she would sit there with her little stats notebook and like write it all down from the radio
Yeah.
broadcasts. And yeah, but
I love the people who
um,
bring notebooks to games. Those are always my favorite people.
yeah, yeah.
Like, yeah.
So, but I think, well, let's like I've got all my questions, and I think we're naturally just jumping around in a different, in different order, but that's okay. Because I do think that the tie-in, like the story is about Luis and Jean,
Yes.
but there's so much more layering to it. Did you set out to write, like you said, you set out to write, you had written historical fiction, you knew you were going to
Hmm.
write about baseball. So was that layer was there at the beginning?
Hmm.
Did you know that you were going to write about a trans character playing baseball right from the very beginning?
Um, so I usually come up with characters first. And so I had this like nebulous idea. This was so it might be helpful to say that like in 2018 I had not yet come out as trans. But I was, knocking on the door.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that I had when I was making Gene up and thinking about him as a person, I think I was thinking around the idea of the fact that he's trans. Like to me, Gene has always been trans. I just maybe wasn't acknowledging. I was like, he's just
Yeah.
really short and
Yeah.
like and like just for no reason. Um,
That's
but then
awesome.
as soon as I
Yeah.
started actually, instead of just thinking, because when I make up characters, I usually don't actually write anything down other than like names and like general ideas about them. I don't write actual prose about them right away. but as soon as I started writing prose, it was like, oh, he like this is a trans man. Like I'm
Yeah.
writing about
Yeah.
a book about a trans man, which I think baseball feels like a very good setting for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so I would say yes and no. I knew I was writing a
Yeah.
book about a
Yeah.
trans character, and I
You
knew
knew, but you didn't know.
yes, yes, yes,
And I think that's where some of the power and some of the amazingness of this book comes from for me personally
yeah.
was yes, it's a very well written rom-com. Like you know, in
Thank you,
that sense, the writing is good and I would have enjoyed it regardless.
thank you.
But it also is aspirational, I think,
Yeah.
and and hopeful of something that maybe we could see. You know,
I
and
mean,
so
I hope so.
I loved it for that too. I loved it
Yeah,
for, you know, like let's imagine this world where this it could happen
yeah.
and it's just a good thing. And that was I really, really liked living in that like living in that world.
Right.
So
And then I go to a real baseball game and I'm like, oh, like
yeah.
I mean, like I
Oh
love baseball. So
dang.
like,
Yeah,
like I
yeah.
love baseball. You're never gonna hear me
But
complaining.
and I'm gonna
But
ask you, I mean, I have my own like things I think in my head,
yeah,
but I'm curious what you think. Like what role do you think books like this play
yeah,
in our journey as a culture to
yeah.
hopefully get to those places?
I mean, I think like I'm not gonna sit here and be like, I think my book is gonna change the way people like think about trans people or think, I mean, maybe it will change how like one or two people think about trans people. I don't
Yeah.
know. But I do think that there is a power to letting ourselves imagine something because
Hmm.
like I just said, I graduated undergraduate in 2018 and I didn't know that trans men even existed until I was in like very late in college. I knew obviously like I was aware that queer people existed,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I didn't know that a trans man is something I like a person could be when I was 22. And so I feel like if I had even just been aware of that younger, that would have changed how I viewed so many things in my life.
Yeah.
And so I do get like, I've had many people tell me after they read this book that they will say, like, this book is really escapist and it's like not anything like our world. And I always feel like I do understand what people are saying. I don't
Yeah.
think they're like
Yeah.
trying to say it as like a dig, but I was actually quite careful when I was writing this book that everything that happens in it is something that like could
Yeah.
happen. And
Yeah.
I think there is something to be said for just like putting a story into the world and saying like, hey, maybe we like you've never thought about this, but like there are trans people who play sports. Like, why
Yeah. Yeah.
can't we imagine a world where
Right.
they
Right.
get to play it with like on this big stage? And why can't we imagine a world where like we cheer for those people? I want to cheer for like a trans baseball player. That would be
Yeah.
incredible. Like,
Yeah.
please, my
Yeah.
whole closet would be that player's jersey. Like, um, so
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that if you never imagine that something could happen, you're not going to take any kind of steps to make it happen. If it feels
Yeah.
impossible, then, or even like doesn't not just feel impossible, it's like something you've never even thought of, you're
Yeah.
certainly not going to try
Right.
to pursue it.
It makes me think of, and I'm gonna like sound old here now, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Of some of the early television shows, like in the 90s and
Yeah.
such, that had queer characters and that
Yeah.
had not it wasn't that it had never happened, but it was
Yeah.
pretty rare. And then you started to finally have characters that were queer characters and weren't just like bit parts or people that
Yeah.
appeared for one episode or something. And I think it's just in sometimes just seeing people. And I think it's so
Yeah.
important just to be like, oh, well, they're just like me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's
Yes.
like, oh, all these horrible, scary things that I've been like that have been implied to me my whole life are just not true.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Yes.
oh, okay. And
Yeah.
so I guess I think that's the power of, you know, like the Prospects and Jean and Louise, but also a whole lot of the other like queer rom-coms that we're seeing. Is just that it's the ordinariness of it, I think,
Yeah.
that in some ways is really the power of it. So
Well, and I feel like I've probably said this so many times, and like anyone who has listened to me talk at any point while I've been publishing this book is probably like, please stop talking about this. But like,
that's okay. I haven't heard it yet, so it's okay. Go ahead.
but like when I was writing this book, I was like, I'm not trying to get this published because when I was writing it in 2018 and 2019 at first, like books about trans people were not on shelves.
Yeah.
So I was not picturing it as like, I mean, there were obviously we've like had books about trans people very sporadically for a long time. I'm not trying to be like, it just started 3 years ago, but
Yeah.
especially not happy books about trans
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And
And not mainstream rom-coms,
yeah, and
like,
not like
they're just gonna be on
adult
the
trans.
shelf.
And so I was like, I just like didn't even think about public. I was like, I'm writing this for me.
Yeah.
I that's why there's like that's why there's so much baseball in it, is because I was writing it for me and I like baseball. Like um so but then in 20 I ended up doing this mentorship program, and right at the end of it, as I was trying to decide if I wanted to like query this book, I thought I maybe didn't, because I was like, oh, well, we're like a year removed from like Cemetery Boys, which was a really like incredible moment for trans fiction, but doing a very different thing than I was doing. Like
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
I think there's 16 in that book. It's very different. Um and then Anita Kelly's like first traditionally published
Yes.
rom-com came out, and like reading that book, like I feel like I've told Anita themselves this like
Yeah.
1,000 times. But like reading that book genuinely was like, oh, this is a thing that we can put on shelves. And so even though I still at that point didn't really think my book was going to get published, it gave me permission to try. And I
Yeah.
think like that's really a special thing that books can do. And I
Yeah.
don't think it necessarily has to be about like one for one. I saw this trans person publish a book, so I'm going to try to publish a book. I think seeing people who are like you or not like you, but are in some way like not in the mainstream,
Yeah.
like doing something cool and special, I feel like gives you permission to think about the cool things you could do that you feel like were not allowed to you, which is very, very thematic to this book.
Yeah.
Like,
That's awesome. And I'm sure you made Anita cry.
I'm sure Anita at this point is like, please stop, stop talking
I
about my
I
book.
seriously doubt that. Well, I'm going to ask a more specific question, and I think
Yeah.
I know the answer to this, but I
Okay.
don't know that everybody else will. Why the Pacific Northwest? Like you're in
Yes.
Brooklyn, which has also a good baseball tradition.
Yes.
Why, what, tell us why it's the Beaverton Beavers that you wrote about and all that good stuff.
So I grew up in Beaverton, um, like right on that like Cedar Hills, Beaverton
Yeah.
border. Um, and so to me, and I don't mean this as a knock on Beaverton, though I think anyone who lives in or is from Beaverton will understand what I'm saying when
They'll
I say this.
forgive you.
When I went to college, A, I lied and told everyone I was from Portland. And B, and also like if I ever told someone I was from Beaverton, they like laughed, because if you're not from like the Pacific Northwest, it sounds like a fake town.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm like, but it's like it's not. That's where I'm
It's
from.
real.
And also, like I when I tried to describe it to people, I used to say like it's four Targets and a Kohl's in a trench coat. Like that. That's how Beaverton used. When I grew up there, that's how Beaverton felt to me. But like now I go back and I'm like, oh, Beaverton's like has stuff going on now. It's
Yeah,
kind of wild.
that's hilarious.
Um,
Well,
but like
I mean, Vancouver is a little bit like this too, but don't let
mhm.
any Vancouver person hear you say it because, we don't like to admit that we're essentially a suburb of Portland because, the river's there, so therefore we're
Right,
not.
we're not. My
And
parents live in
we
Vancouver
were
now.
here first. That's our
Yes.
claim to fame. But essentially, it's,
Yeah.
like you have all these little tiny satellite communities that start out as
Yes.
little tiny downtowns, and then they basically get like these giant strip
Yes.
mall zones around them, but it's still
Yes.
this little tiny downtown.
And
And they
like,
turn into these massive cities, and you're like, okay.
right? It's so like the like I moved away for college and then I ended up moving to New York after I graduated college. And the further I was from home, the more annoyed I got when other people were rude about where I came from. Where I was like, well, no, I can make fun of it. You can't make fun of it.
Exactly.
And then also, I guess just like the more I appreciated that even if it doesn't seem special from the outside, that is where I came from and it did
Yeah.
shape me. And I have like when I was driving Anita, actually, I had my launch event with Anita and they were driving me back to my hotel after we were driving through Beaverton. And I was like, I recognize like everything here. This is very much where I'm from. And it was so special to get to see that when I was publishing a book
Yeah,
about
that's
also
neat.
no one writes about Beaverton.
No, no. Yeah.
So it felt very special to me and
Well,
also
and it was believable. I mean, I think it might be actually in Hillsborough, but I mean, there is a stadium out there.
yeah,
And,
The Hillsborough
like
Hops.
it's believable that, there could be a minor
Yeah.
league team there. So
Well,
yeah, no,
like the Mariners equivalent team is in Tacoma. And I'm
yeah,
like, that's
yes, the
about like
Rainiers.
this is
Yeah,
yes.
yeah,
The
yeah.
Rainiers, they're mentioned in the book many times.
Yeah, I know. I was like,
Yeah.
I
Oh, I know there. I know.
know.
I like one, you might appreciate this in a way that I feel like nobody else reading this book is. But like they order takeout when they're in Tacoma and they order it from like Frisco Freeze. And when I put that in, I was like, I have to Google because I've eaten there one time, but it was a long time ago. I had to Google whether their fries come in a basket or a wax paper like container
Awesome.
because I was like, there's going to be one person who reads this
Who
book
will know?
and is like
Yeah,
from
yeah.
Tacoma and is really going to care about this.
That's funny.
Like,
I went to college in,
mhm,
well, just south of Tacoma, but yeah.
yeah,
But when you said Rainiers, I was like, oh, I know where that stadium is.
you know them. It's a cool stadium. But I really love that about the Mariners that their AAA team is so close. It's like
Yeah.
like a half hour away. Um, and originally when I had like started drafting this book, well, like a very early draft, I had put the AAA team in Portland, and because Portland used to have a AAA team, um, so I was like, oh, we'll like pay homage. And then I had the major league team be in a completely different city, and I was like, is it too unrealistic to put them in Beaverton and have the major league team be in? And I just decided at a certain point, I was like, I don't care. Like, I don't care if it's
Yeah. Yeah.
unrealistic. Like,
It doesn't matter.
that's what I want it to
And it
be.
isn't really. I mean,
Yeah,
teams are all over the place, and
yeah,
their minor league teams are close or not close, and it just
yes,
depends. And yeah. So again, this is like I was trying to think of all these good questions, and I thought, well, I think I probably know the answer to some of these, but I think it makes for interesting conversation
yeah,
anyway. And um, why minor leagues?
yeah. I think so. Before I say this, I want to make it clear that this is not like I'm not casting aspersions on any books that are about major league players because I have read many and I love many. Um, but there is an aspect of when you write about the major leagues, like those players are they're much closer to celebrity.
Yeah,
Like not
yeah,
necessarily like I think there are a lot of baseball players who probably don't get recognized that often because
yeah,
most people don't follow it that closely and there's a lot of baseball players. Um, but when I applied for this mentorship program, I distinctly remember asking because like two of the people I was applying to work with were like, we don't want any books about celebrities. And so I messaged them being like, would a book about minor league baseball players count as celebrities? And they were like, you could not pay me enough to name a single minor league baseball player. So no, they are not celebrities. And I think that really,
And, and meanwhile, the baseball fans are very fronted by this.
I mean, like,
Yeah,
but like both of them do watch baseball. They just don't. And
Yeah.
like, I think this is true of most people who watch baseball, don't pay attention to the minor leagues.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
like totally fine, but it's kind of the epitome of why I wanted to write about them because I think there's just something very human about playing in the minor leagues. Like, it's very humbling. And I think when you write about the major leagues, the questions are like, do I get to stay here? Am
Mhm.
I like going to make enough? Like, am I going to make a lot of money or a crazy amount of money? Am
Yeah.
I going to win the World Series? Who's paying attention to me? Like, it's about the pressure. Whereas, like, in the minor leagues, you're not making a lot of money. Sometimes you're making like less than poverty wages.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't want to romanticize that because I fully, like, I do really believe that minor leaguers need to be paid more money than they are. And I'm really glad that they unionized recently.
Yes.
But you can't be playing in the minor leagues for the glory. Like, the
Yeah.
questions, instead of do I get to stay here and like who is clapping for me, the questions become like, am I good enough? And is all of this effort ever going to pay off? And like, am I ever going to get to have the big dream? Am I going to get to have that one moment where it all feels like, wow, these years of playing for no money and taking 13-hour road trip buses overnight,
Yeah.
sleep. Minor leaguers literally sleep on the floor of their road trip buses. Like,
Yeah.
it's not
It's a
glamorous.
pretty
And
brutal. Yeah, it's not romantic.
yes,
I mean, it is kind of in a certain way, but
yeah,
the actual day-to-day living of it
yes.
is
I
not at all.
Every time I go to or like watch a minor league game, I just think to myself the whole time, I'm like, some of these players slept on the bus, like on the floor of a tour bus, a road trip bus last night.
Yeah.
And now they're like, have to play a sport professionally, and they're like, their performance determines whether they ever get to make it to
Yeah.
the major league. And that's wild to me. And I think also there are so many players in the minor leagues who are just never going to, the vast majority of players in the minor leagues are never going to make it to the majors. So it's really about trying in a way that I don't think the major leagues
Yeah.
are. And that's what I wanted this story to be about.
And I think that in the other, we haven't talked about the Vince character yet, but
Yeah.
you also have the young players coming up, kind
Mm-hmm.
of going past with the older players who
Yeah.
maybe still are playing, but they're not in the majors anymore, but maybe they were,
Yeah.
and or they're recovering from an injury and then they'll go
Yeah.
back or whatever. It's just an interesting. I just remember going, and I'm pretty sure it was not a AAA team. I can't remember. Is it A, double A, triple A, or just triple A and double A? I can't remember.
It's, they have, so now they have low A, high A,
Oh,
double
wow. Okay.
A, and triple A. There's a
Okay.
lot.
I think, well, this was like when I was a kid, so
Yeah.
I think it was just single A. I
Yeah.
think there is a single A team I grew up in Central Washington, and I think
Cool.
the Yakima Bears, I think it was. I can't remember.
My dad is from Yakima.
Oh,
That's
yay.
so cool.
Okay.
Yeah. That's very cool.
And my dad used to take us to those
Yeah.
games, and I just remember it being like this, in some ways, the ideal of baseball in the
Yeah.
summer, like everybody's sitting
Yes.
around, the crowd isn't huge, the kids are running around in the grass,
Yeah.
and there's game going on, and somebody's probably selling bad hot dogs, and
Yes.
and
Classic.
yeah. And I think I like that whole atmosphere is just, there is some, that's where the romance is, I think, of somebody,
Yes.
yeah, families just hanging out and people, um but I also felt like that's a place where that was a setting where it felt believable
Yeah.
that there could be a trans person playing
Yeah.
too. Like, that
And
somebody's
because,
good enough to
yeah.
be working their way up, and in a world where that hopefully does happen at some point, then that's
Yeah.
probably how a lot of those people will
Yeah.
come up.
I don't I don't know
And
if you watched Pitch when it was on.
I did not.
Okay. If you are into like baseball, you should watch it. I know you said that you don't like watch baseball a ton anymore, but it's a good show. It was only on for one season. Um, but she makes it into the majors in like the first episode. She's making her major league debut, and I love that show, but so much of that show is about like the pressure that she's under as the first woman. Obviously, like the first
Yeah.
woman who plays Major League Baseball is going to have a
Somebody in
different
chat said
experience.
pitch with a whole bunch of exclamation.
That is also, I think I've seen that show like four times. It's
Okay,
very
I'm
good.
writing it down.
Um,
I'll put it in the I try to put anything that we talk about for people to check out in the
Excellent.
video description too later so that people can remember.
Excellent.
So
I'm still very like upset that it got canceled, although I do have like opinions about the romantic subplot on that show, but it's fine. The rest of the show is great. But um so much of that show, and I think done quite well, is about like the pressure that she's under as the like she's the first woman, not the first trans man. It's a very different experience that they would be having, but also there are similarities.
yeah,
She's
yeah,
the first person of a marginalized group to be playing like Major League Baseball, and the show is very much about the pressure that she's under. And I wasn't super interested in writing a book that was entirely about like the pressure that Gene is
yeah,
under. I
yeah,
wanted him to have this like space to breathe and enjoy the life that
yeah,
he's living
yeah,
in a
yeah.
way that I think would have been hard if I had just focused on like
Right.
the major leagues.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna we touched on this very briefly at the beginning about
Yeah.
the trope, you know, the
Yeah.
rivals to lovers trope. And
Yeah.
I mean, I think we in some books it would have been called enemies to lovers, but
Hmm.
not really,
Yeah.
um, it's almost like it's conflict to resolution in some ways.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
it's like people who don't get along for whatever reason, and then suddenly they do. But I'm curious why, if you have thoughts on why we love that trope so much, because I think we do. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a great trope. There's a reason why it's so popular. And I mean,
Yeah.
I like them. I
Oh,
read
I love it.
dozens of
So,
them. And yeah,
yeah. I mean, like, I sometimes say, like, I think that this book is friends to lovers in like masquerading as rivals to lovers
yeah,
because
yeah,
they were very much friends in college and then had a falling out. And then are friends again relatively quickly, not like two pages
yeah.
in or anything, but they spend most of the book liking each other. Sorry if that's like too much of a spoiler. But it is a
Read the book
romance novel,
anyway.
so
You won't
like you
mind.
should read it. But I do think I think that readers, especially when you're reading romance, um, really like tension between two
Yeah,
characters, and I think that that can come from so many different places, and sometimes like enemies to lovers and rivals to lovers, it's just kind of baked in
hmm
to the
yeah,
concept. Like, okay, you don't like this person for whatever reason, but we, the audience, know that you're going to end up together. So it's like very fun and it's a meaty dynamic to play with. Whereas, like, sometimes I think, like, I was just talking to a friend about this actually, but like, I think
oh good.
friends to lovers can be a little bit harder
Yeah,
because, like, you're kind of showing your hand. Like, you already
right,
know why the
right.
characters like each other from the beginning. So it's harder to maintain that tension. And I think you just have to play on different parts of the book. Like how much of the tension in their relationship is coming from the relationship between the two characters, how much is coming from like outside forces, and how much is just internal.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and I think that we like rivals to lovers because it's it has that tension built in. There's something like, especially in a sports romance, there's just something sexy about competition. Like it's just very fun.
yeah, yeah,
And I like it makes total sense to me that
yeah,
people really
yeah.
love it. Even if I'm like, I will be the first to admit that I don't think like this book is the epitome of rivals to
No,
lovers.
no,
There are
that's
other
fair.
books that are leaning
Yeah,
harder on that
yeah,
for sure.
yeah. For sure, but I think that there's been discussion in the community in the last few months about can you actually do like enemies to lovers in
Yeah.
contemporary romance because
Yeah.
like for two people to actually be enemies,
Yes.
that's pretty heavy,
Yes.
and
Yes.
what do you really, the psychology behind what would have to happen for them to
Yes.
become is like, do you really want to go
Right.
there?
Exactly. And like I think
And I
rivals
think,
to lovers is
yeah,
like a little,
yeah,
it softens
exactly.
it a little bit.
Exactly. Or, like I don't like you for whatever reason. And
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
I
I do you
have
think,
noticed like,
oh,
no,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, if you do you think tropes are part of the comfort in a way of some of these books? Like
Yeah.
like they provide the tension for sure, and you want that
Hmm.
tension pretty much in any book. Like any
Yes.
book, you got to have some tension in the plot, or it's I
Boring.
mean, some books can pull it off without it,
Yeah.
but that's hard to do, to write a really good
Yes.
book that doesn't have a lot of tension in it. And I think in romance, these tropes just are the source of the
Yes.
tension. Do you think they also, though, give us comfort just because we kind of know, oh, well, this is what's going on, and it's
Yes.
going to be okay in the end?
Yes. Like for sure. And like, I do think that they're really comforting. I think you also see that in the way that some people respond to like tropes that they don't like because they like for whatever reason like don't find them comforting. Like
That's
I
a fair
think
point. Yeah. Yeah.
like miscommunication gets a lot of flack. Whereas I'm
Yeah.
like, well, if it's written really well and I understand why they missed the like why the characters miscommunicated, then to me it's like, oh, it's very human. Like
Yeah.
people do miscommunicate all the time. It just can't be like, I saw you hugging another woman and now I think you're cheating on me. Like that's like that
Yeah.
to me is
Yeah.
not satisfying.
Why
But
didn't you just,
if yeah,
like,
just
yeah.
ask.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
like, but I do like I think that some tropes are maybe a little bit too like miscommunication. Sometimes people react to them in the way that they do because it's something that happens daily
Yeah.
between people and
Yeah.
it's not comforting. Like
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
um but that being said, like I do think that there is a comfort in a just like reading romance, you know how it's going to end, and especially when you have particular tropes or beats that you really enjoy. Um I think that there is something about that reading experience that you often can't get from other genres.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that I think I really love a romance author who respects their tropes and like really
Yeah.
tries to write it. And I don't even think I'm like, I do not think I'm the tropiest writer in the world.
No. No. Yeah. This
I
was
will be
definitely
honest.
kind of like from pieces. They had pieces from
Yes. I mean,
different.
like,
Yeah.
if I was the tropiest writer in the world, there would have only been one bed in all of their hotel rooms. Which I had one of my friends when she read it was like, I was so mad, Kendall, or like, hey P, I spent this entire book waiting for like the chapter where there was only going to be one bed in the hotel room. I'm like, sorry. Like,
it's kind of funny when you think about tropes. It's like in some ways, like they provide structure, they provide tension,
yeah,
they do provide some comfort because you're like, oh, I like this. I like how these usually play out. But
yeah,
in some ways, I think subverting them also,
hmm,
like, and there was power in, as somebody said that would have been really funny, but honestly, I think there was power in I think it would have, I actually do think it would have been funny, especially if they were like in on it. You know what I mean?
yes,
Like they're just like, oh geez. But I think there was also power in for their particular dynamic of having it be a choice
yes,
too. And
because
like because the whole one bed trope is you're just like, oh, I've got to sleep with this person, and
yeah,
you're just laying there like shoot. you know.
yes,
Um but there's like a certain underpinning of lack of choice there that
yeah,
depending on how it's handled can actually be a little
yeah.
uncomfortable. So
I think like it goes back to that tension. Like some authors can, it's like some authors can really pull the circumstances off so well and make it feel both like not creepy, but also have a lot of tension to it. And it's really
yeah,
cool. But like when I was writing this book, I was like, well, if they walked into a hotel room, they're like there, they didn't book the room, they're there with their team. They walked into a hotel room and there's only one bed, they would just be like, "Hey Baker, there's only one bed in this room. Like, should
Yeah.
I call the front
Fix
desk?
it.
Like, I
Please
am not,
fix it.
this isn't gonna work."
Yeah.
And also because I think because they are two people who have led kind of in whatever ways, because I think it's different for both of them, but also similar. They have led very like watched lives. Like
Yeah.
people are, even if they're not famous, people aren't, they're not getting like ignored. They're not flying under the radar. And I really wanted when they got to like come together, both as friends and then later like romantically, I wanted it to really feel like a choice. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
they're like, this is what I want to do, because so much of this book is like about when do you know that you really want something, and when do you know that like you trust yourself enough to do it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I wanted them to get to want.
Yeah. And I think that, like we talked about, it's not super tropey. I mean, there is the
Yeah.
I'm mad at you to friends to lovers kind of
Sure.
aspect of it. But I think honestly, one of the biggest points of tension is those choices that they're going to have to
Yeah.
make. And so, yeah, yeah, I think it worked better the way you did it.
That being said, man, I do love reading a really tropey book. I
Oh
like,
yeah, oh
and I
yeah,
think that's like something that's really special about the genre is that different kinds of writers and different kinds of books can still really
yeah,
thrive. And it's like what I know, it's like what romance does so well is
yeah,
that
yeah,
even though there is this one plot that we are all technically following, the books like can be so different from each other and
yeah,
can lean on
yeah.
different aspects of the genre.
I think that's actually one of the reasons that I enjoy them so much
Yeah.
is I know I'm going to get a happy ending. And sometimes
Yes.
with the world being the way it is right now, I would really like to
Yes.
have a happy ending. Thank you very
Yes.
much. I do not want any surprises.
Yeah. Please, no twists.
But I think the other reason that I've enjoyed them so much is that you know what the structure is,
Hmm.
and you have a good idea of, if they're if an author is using a trope, like
Yeah.
that, and they know that and you know.
Yes.
What the fascinating thing for me is how each author gets there,
Yes.
and
It's
how they
yeah.
choose to get there. I read a YA like not too long ago where I was just like, okay, the writing is really cute and I really like the characters, but it's so obvious like what's going to happen to cause
Yeah.
the bad tension to
Yeah.
happen at the 80% mark. And I'm like, I don't know that I like knowing that much.
Yeah.
But the book was really good, and so I kept reading. And even though it was related to what I thought it was going to
Hmm.
be, like the author was like, no, it's kind of that,
Yeah.
but not. And so, and I
Yeah.
love that. I love to be like, oh, they got me. So I think that's where the magic of it is, honestly,
Yeah.
that each skilled author is bringing something different to this thing that
Yes.
we know is gonna happen. So,
Yeah. I think there's something really special to like knowing basically what's going to happen, but then getting to see the way the author brings like those specific characters through all of those beats. Because, I mean, in an ideal world, they're going to feel a little bit different for
yeah,
every two people. And their own, like the things that those characters are bringing to the book, and like the author's voice and the author's, like, whatever writing proclivities are going to bring
yeah,
to the book really shape it to the point that like then when you finish the book you're like, oh, of course it happened that way. I believe that that was the truth of that story, but
yeah,
when you're reading
yeah,
it, like you sort of know but not quite, and I think that
yeah.
that is
Do
truly
you
really
think
special.
that these books, the rom-coms, can do different things because of these structures than maybe a literary fiction book can do, or maybe a thriller or
Yeah,
whatever else.
so for I'm gonna like tell a tangential story, and
Okay.
it's related, I promise. I don't know if you have seen Hadestown. or like listened to
I
the, I don't know
have
if you're big,
not,
I'm
but
not
I
a
have
big Broadway
heard many
person.
good things about
Okay.
it.
I am not a huge Broadway person, but I ended up getting free tickets through my work like 3 years ago. Well, actually, it's probably more than 3 years ago because it was before the pandemic. Oh my God. I'm
Yeah.
getting old.
We should
Oh
probably not go
God.
down that rabbit hole.
Oh God.
I know
Okay.
it.
It was like 5 years ago. Anyways, I saw it and it was incredible. But they tell you literally in the first song exactly what's going to happen, which I think most of us probably generally know the like Orpheus and Eurydice myth. Um, and they tell, and just in case you don't, they tell you right in the first song exactly what's
Yeah.
going to happen. And when I sat down, I hadn't like really been seeking this show out, but I was like, I don't know if this is going to work on me because like I'm not that into, like, I'm not a huge musical person and I'm not that much of an Orpheus and Eurydice person. So I was like, I don't know. I cried at the end of that show. And like it's done, it still feels shocking when it happens and it still hurts, even though you know it's gonna happen. And I think romance does kind of the opposite, where it's
Yeah.
like if you can find an author who still makes you feel that like swell of joy when the payoff happens, that is like writing magic to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And I think that because we do know what is coming at the end of the book, we get to have a little bit of space to explore things that maybe would be hard to explore in other genres because this book originally like took place in the 90s and Gene was like much more closeted than he is in the final book, and it wasn't a romance. And I think even though I don't think Gene was like a sad person, the book felt much sadder. And by making it be a rom-com, I was like, okay, I know what the payoff is at the end of this book. And so when I get into these moments where Gene has like these doubts or like people are being bigoted towards him or any of that stuff, I still got to have like this awareness that the core of the book was like hope and that I was working towards this big payoff. And even if I had written it as like historical fiction with a happy ending, which those books exist and like I love them,
Yeah.
and that is
Yeah.
one of my favorite genres to read, I think that the experience of reading it would be different because the
Yeah.
people reading it wouldn't know that the end is going to be happy. So when bad things happen to Gene or Luis, or like because Luis is struggling with his own shit in this world, like, when these bad
Yeah.
things happen to them, they don't like you don't have that trust in the author necessarily because you can't just like here's my historical fiction novel, and in the author's note I write like it ends happy, I promise. Like, so
Yeah.
you don't have that
Yeah.
trust. And with a
Yeah.
rom-com, I think like even with readers I will never meet and people who have never read my writing, I still feel like I'm sitting next to them and like going, no, trust me, like it's gonna be okay. And so
Yeah.
the experience of reading the harder stuff is just very different. It's not as it can still break your heart and be like really painful without feeling like having that heaviness to it.
Yeah.
And I think that is like why I gravitate towards this genre so much. It's not so much that it doesn't deal with hard things, because I think it does a lot of the time, but that it deals with those hard things from the angle of, and I'm still choosing to hope. Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's very special.
I think that's a really eloquent way to put it. I think when I started working at the bookstore and now it's like, yeah, you go
I
into that
know,
weird
like, I don't want to do the math. Yeah.
but I think it was the summer of 21, and it
Yeah.
was right before Allison Cochran's The Charm Offensive came out, and we got
Yeah.
to have Allison is local to us, and we got
Yeah.
to have arcs, and
Yeah.
hers was the first arc I ever read as a bookseller. And oh my gosh, I mean, I was just like, why have I not been
Yeah.
reading this stuff?
You're really setting the bar high with
Yeah,
that
yeah.
one.
Um, but I think that was like I read a lot of like mass market um romance, like way, 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 way back. Like
Hmm.
I remember coming home my freshman year of college from after first semester and just being fried and going over to a friend's house and like getting this enormous stack of Harlequins and just being like, I
Yeah.
don't want to think.
Yes. Yes.
That's not maybe so much what's going on in rom-coms now.
Yeah.
And
And I
and
think,
I think that what really struck me about that book as being the first one that I returned to in a long time, and then a lot of stuff that the prospects and Anita Kelly's work and all kinds of
mhm,
others, is that because of that safety net, it's almost like you've got
yeah.
you got the bowling barriers that you're playing the
Yeah.
kids game, right? So you know it's going to be okay. And within the confines of that space, like there's some pretty powerfully difficult things that get dealt with, but it's like a safe place to do
Yeah.
that. And I think that I haven't really, I read a lot of different genres, like
Hmm.
little dabble here and there and everywhere. And I don't know that any other genre quite does that the way
Yeah.
that like literary fiction does, but literary fiction, you don't know what's going to happen.
No.
You might just, drowned in desolation for the entire book, and that's how
Yes.
it ends. And you're just like,
Yes.
oh, this is terrible.
It could be me, age 22, reading A Little Life, knowing that it's going to be sad and still walking out and it's like water warped from all the times I cried. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And those books are serve their own purpose, but I just
Yes.
feel like these books give people space to
Yes.
feel
And
things in a safe environment,
yeah.
and I
And I
really
think
think
like
that's pretty special.
I do know that there's some disagreement amongst like rom-com readers about when a book stops being a rom-com. And I think that I have admittedly, pretty loose definition of when a book, like, I think a book can deal with a lot of stuff and still be a rom. Obviously, I
Yeah,
think that
yeah,
just based on what I write and the things that I read. But I think that that is the beauty of what a lot of
yeah,
like the current
yeah,
rom-com scene is doing
yeah,
is
yeah. Giving you
showing people who,
space. Yeah,
yes, and people like showing characters who are truly flawed and like have some maybe some really heavy stuff going on in their lives, and they like, I mean, you can also do this in contemporary romance. The barrier between those two genres is quite blurry.
yeah,
um
yeah,
but um but to me, being able to like in a rom-com, the like having that core of like humor and some kind of
yeah,
levity to
yeah,
it
yeah,
while dealing with some hard stuff and showing these characters still get to
yeah,
find love is like very powerful, especially because I think pretty much everyone is going through it in some way or
yeah,
another right now.
yeah. Everybody
um
gets to like it's cathartic in some way for
yes.
everybody, and yeah, yeah.
Yes.
So I'm looking over at the comments. Somebody said at the beginning of the conversation that baseball is
Yeah.
romantic, and I have to say that of all the sports, like yeah, probably that
Yes.
one would win if I had to pick like which is the most romantic sport from
I
a,
am
like
so biased, but like, yes.
well, I think
Yes.
about it just because of the way it unfolds. It's not
Yes.
it's more languid. It's not that
Hmm.
you don't have your like moments of speed, but it's not, it can unfold, you can enjoy it, you can talk to people while you're watching, and you can, it just
It's like very
things can
much,
happen.
it's a sport where like little details matter and sometimes you have to be patient, and both of those things are very like romantic to me
Yeah,
and
yeah.
very.
Earlier on, we were talking about whether the major league, minor league teams were
Mhm.
could be so close. Somebody commented that they were having that conversation. I don't know. I'd have to go look and see. Like, are Seattle Tacoma like the only ones that are that close, or are there others that are?
When I was making the choice, I did Google because I mostly watch the Mariners. They are like my team. So I thought it was quite normal. I'm like right now, like
I'm
I
not
wonder if the
biased at all.
Mariners, no, not at all. Had someone ask me if they were like, "Do you have a favorite team?" And I'm like, I could tell you so much about the Mariners right now, and I'm holding it back. But so I thought it was quite normal to have your AAA team be so close. And then I was Googling when I was picking a city for this book, and they are by far the closest to their
Okay.
AAA team.
Yeah.
And Beaverton is closer to Portland than Tacoma is to Seattle, but I just decided I didn't care.
Okay, somebody has so I was going down the whole thing. Somebody said, this is why I don't watch drama anymore because I want guaranteed happy ending. I'm
Yeah.
with you there. I've dropped so many like drama series that I've been like it's just too stressful. No,
Yes.
I need to know that it's okay. And
Yes.
I find myself like I don't know if it's an age thing or no, I probably have always been that way. I prefer the episodic shows too. Like
Yeah.
it in one or two episodes, like everything gets wrapped up. Like
Yes.
you're gonna drag me along for a whole season. I don't think I can do that. It's too stressful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sarah posted a very good question. They said, so the Mariners drop hot dogs on with parachutes in their stadium, and they want to know what food would be dropped from parachutes in the Beaverton Stadium.
I don't think Beaverton has that kind of a budget.
Well, pretend that it's the
Just
Portland team then.
pretend.
If Portland,
Okay.
if Portland has a Major League Baseball team, what food are they gonna drop?
Oh my God. I'm honestly surprised that the Mariners do hot dogs and not garlic fries. Because if you talk to anybody, like everyone's like, did you eat the garlic fries when you went to? I was like, I didn't get any garlic fries. I got a soft pretzel. Um,
That's what you're supposed
I
to do in
don't.
New York or Philadelphia or whatever.
I get a soft pretzel at every baseball game I go to. It's like that's my ballpark food is a soft pretzel. Um, I think it, I don't like, I can't think of something off the top of my head, but like, it would be something weird and it would be
Yeah.
sold by like one of the cleverly named like food carts
Hmm.
in Portland. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
you,
No, I'm thinking, I mean, I could think of a lot of really good snarky answers, but I was trying to think of an actual serious one.
sure, yes, I could make jokes. But
I don't know, like voodoo donuts, maybe.
yeah, something literally like something like voodoo donuts. I do think it would be I feel like Portland is like a little more attached to being like weird and quirky than
Yeah,
Seattle
for sure.
is.
For sure.
So I do think they would do something a little bit less classic than a hot dog. They would
Yeah,
be going for
yeah,
like a weird donut or like something like that.
yeah, yeah. That was an awesome question, Sarah. I love that. So I always try to do this at the end of an interview just to give people a chance to think of any other things that they want to ask you. So be thinking of your good questions if you've got any, or if something came up during the interview that you want to ask about. And while we give people the chance to think, can you share with me one or two books that you've read recently that you really liked that you would recommend to people, if that's possible? Like, oh, sometimes we go through times where we're not reading because it's crazy
I'm
and you've had a
I mean,
crazy few weeks. So,
I will
but
admit that I'm currently drafting my second, but I'm actually like working on my first round of revisions for my second book. So I'm a little
yay!
bit in a hole.
Yeah,
But
yeah, that's fair.
that being
So it
said,
could go back like a few weeks
yes,
or months. Like that's
yes,
totally
yes,
fine.
yes. I first have to shout out Alicia Thompson has also a baseball romance called The Art of Catching Feelings coming out next month. And
Oh,
if you liked
yay.
the baseball in this book, you will love that book. It is like I don't even like I'm not even gonna try to get into how much I love it, but it is to me like the epitome of exactly what we are just talking about, where like baseball is romantic because of like the patience and the details and the payoff. Like that is that book. It's gorgeous. It's a beautiful book. And then right now I am reading Anita Kelly's next book, which also comes out in June, called Heartwaves, and it takes place on in like a fictional coastal town in Oregon.
I am
Um,
now officially jealous of you.
I'm like, I
As
feel like I
we've
have
been
to like,
talking about it, and I'm just like, oh, I want to read it.
I mean, like, I don't have to tell you this, but it is exactly as good as you think it's going to be.
Oh, yay, I'm
Um,
glad to hear
Anita
that.
is like,
I'm not surprised, but I'm glad to hear
right? Like
it.
every time Anita sends something, I'm like, excellent, a new favorite book.
Yeah,
This will be
exactly.
my entire
Exactly.
personality. So I've been like rewarding myself with chapters while I edit. I've been
Oh,
like
that's
reading,
nice.
and
That's
it's
a good idea,
true.
actually. A little
Yes,
brain break. I'm
truly
still
phenomenal.
actually I have the How You Get the Girl,
Hmm.
and then my older daughter loves Anita Kelly's books, and so I loaned it to her. Um so I just got it back, and now I'm like, okay, I got it. I got halfway through and it was like, no, you need to read this first. She's in her senior year of college. I'm like, you need this more than I do.
Oh, that's very good timing.
And
That book
so
is,
I was like, I'll read the rest when you get done. So now
yes,
I have it back, so I need to finish it.
it is so good. I actually think like, I mean, the entire book is phenomenal. I love, like we were talking earlier about like what you can do with the different beats in a romance novel and like make them your own. I think that book is really
Yeah,
does it in a
yeah.
very special way. It's
And for
extremely
those
good.
of you who haven't seen that book, it's called How You Get the Girl. It's Anita Kelly.
Yes.
Um,
It's like
they
a
are uh,
basketball.
they are local to us as well.
Yes.
We have all the people except for KT now needs to move back so we can have him too. But
You're gonna like get on a committee with my parents. My parents live in Vancouver right now. So
oh, okay. Well, there we go.
um I know.
Actually, pretty much once you're on when once you hang out, then you're ours, whether you live here or not. So,
I am
but
happy and honored to be included.
but if you like sports romances, um, I mean, it's a great book, but it's also a fun basketball themed romance. So,
I love that. I feel
definitely
like
check that out.
I think I've heard Anita, they've described it as like sports adjacent. And
Yeah,
I think that
yeah,
it's like definitely like it's definitely a sports romance. There is like basketball in it. I played basketball for a couple years and have watched plenty, and there was stuff in it that I was like, oh, I don't really know. I
yeah,
don't really know
yeah,
about that. Uh I'm not as enough of a connoisseur of baseball basketball. Um but I do definitely think you can like it is a book that is extremely enjoyable, even if you're not usually like a
yes,
sports
yeah.
romance person.
Like I'm not a huge sports person, but I know
Yeah.
enough about them to enjoy
Yes.
it. But I would say that Prospects is more of a sports related book than How You Get the Girl. I mean, How You Get the Girl, the basketball is kind of the backdrop, whereas
Yeah. It's
Prospects,
the
like the
setting.
baseball, is like very important and integral to the story. Um, but honestly, the thing that I think is fun too about a lot of these books is they often do have very specific settings.
Yeah.
Like Anita's done a cooking one and she's done
Hmm.
a trail one, and one of Allison's is the reality show and yours is
Yeah.
baseball. Like you don't have to have be totally into any of those things to enjoy the book. So I always like
And
tell
also
people
like
you don't have to be a sports, to
yeah,
be way into sports to love the prospects, and you don't have to be way into hiking to love, or
I
whatever.
am
So,
not I mean like I'm from Oregon, so I have done my fair share of hiking. I'm not a huge hiking person, but Anita's so good. They could take me anywhere. Like
yes,
anywhere in a book
exactly.
and I'm there.
Exactly. So, we do have a couple of good questions that we can close on. Sarah asked what inspired Luis's love of the Muppets. And then Seth asked an adjacent question, which is who was your favorite
Ooh, okay.
Muppet?
What inspired Luis's I okay. One of my favorite things in a book is getting like the weird tidbits that like those things that you always know about your friends that make them feel like full people, like just the weird stuff that they enjoy. And I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
like especially for Luis because he's like has so much anxiety. Every person I know who has really intense anxiety, even if it's not a movie or a show or whatever, they have like something that they listen to or watch or like a video game they play or whatever when
yeah.
they're feeling really anxious because it's really familiar and comforting. And I really liked the idea of Luis liking this like old movie and this old like variety show because it was like comforting to him because he's watched it so many times. Like he could
Yeah,
mouth along
yeah,
to the entire Muppets movie. Also, the Muppets movie is hilarious. If people haven't watched it
yes.
recently,
It's
it
also
holds
a
up.
bone for us people. us old people who grew up watching those shows, and we're like, oh, thank you.
Okay, I've seen all of the Muppet Show. I've seen the Muppet movie.
Yay.
It's good. It like
Your
but I just like
parents did a good job.
I really like I just liked the idea of Louise kind of liking something that was not
Yeah. Yeah.
new.
Yeah.
Like he
Yeah.
clearly like has liked this since he was a kid.
I love that.
And
Do you
that
have
was
a
just
favorite
very fun to me.
Muppet?
I mean, I
Or
feel
is
like
that
if I
even
don't
possible? It's like asking
like,
if
is
you
it
have a favorite book.
possible? I mean, like first, I feel like you legally have to say Miss Piggy because if you don't say Miss Piggy, like she and Kermit will come yell at you. So I do love Miss Piggy. Um, Gonzo for trans reasons.
See, I
It,
Gonzo is my absolute favorite
like
Muppet.
to me, I'm like, yes, yes, I'm a trans man, but most of all, like I just mostly feel like Gonzo.
Yeah,
um, Gonzo gets it. Gonzo would probably be my pick, but
I
uh,
approve. And then I said that was going to be the last question, but someone did ask about the next book. Are you allowed to talk about that yet? Or you still have to wait?
think that
It's
I
okay.
feel like they would like my publisher probably wouldn't be mad at me, but I
You're not ready.
get nervous. I
It's
will
okay.
say, no, I can like I will say vague. Um, it is also a gay trans rom-com, so we are keeping in line with
Yeah.
that. It is not about baseball. I am sure I will find a way to like mention baseball
That's okay. That's
in
good.
every book I write until I die. Um, but it is not about baseball and it is a roommate romance. And I am
Okay.
purposely
Get
leaving
it.
out like the most salient
That's
plot detail.
okay. No, I
um,
mean, I ask that of almost
yeah.
everybody that I talk to,
Mhm.
but we're used to the fact that some people are like, oh yeah, it's coming out in 3 months and I can tell you everything. And other people are
Yes.
like, I can tell you that I'm working on another book and that's it. So yeah, that's totally
It
fine.
will, I don't even 100% know like when it's coming out. Either late next year or early 2026 probably.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll
But
be looking for
and I'm
it.
sure you will all hear a lot about it
Yay.
once we're a little
That's
further down the
awesome.
line.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's normal. It's normal in the book world
Yes.
for there to be long time in between.
Yes.
We don't forget. We stalk you so that we know when it's coming
Uh,
next.
I appreciate it. I'm also
Well,
sure like I will talk to you many
yeah.
times.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. Well, I really appreciate you coming tonight. This was super fun.
It
And
was
I'm glad that
delightful.
we
Thank
figured
you.
it out, even though we were a
Yes.
little confused at the beginning.
A little bit
Um,
some link confusion, but I really appreciate you having me. It's been delightful.
Good. I'm so glad. And I just wanted to let everybody else know that we do these most Tuesdays. There will be time in year that we are taking a break, but we are going to be talking to Jen Reese next Tuesday. Their middle grade book, and this is their, I think, third or fourth middle grade book just came out today, and they got to be at
Oof,
Powell Cedar Hills Crossing tonight. So
love it.
we get to talk about to them next week. I had one author say, "Well, are you still okay with doing a pre-order campaign with me, even though I'm gonna be at Powell's on my opening, like release day?" And I'm like, "Are you
Yeah.
kidding? Getting to be at
Please.
Powell's for your release day is like, getting to be at the Strand in New York City. Like it's a
It
big deal."
it is a weird like
So
it is a little weird. To I don't know, or I feel like Oregon people get it. Powell's is like
yeah,
it's
yeah,
like a meeting a celebrity, but I feel like that
yes, yeah.
every time I go into a bookstore, I'm like, there's like celebrities here.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, yeah. See, I think that's a typical book person
yeah,
thing. It's like, oh, look at
yes,
all these famous people.
yes. Like I when I went into vintage and I actually picked up my pre-order of Allison's book because she did her pre-order campaign for you
Yeah,
guys.
yeah.
And then I got to like sign a couple copies. I was like, I feel like I'm meeting celebrities right now. Like it's just very
It's fun.
cool.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
love that about the book world. Everybody's
Yes.
pretty down to earth, but also you're like, oh, I get
Yes.
to.
Everyone's simultaneously down to earth and starstruck by each
Yeah,
other at the
exactly.
same time.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
fantastic. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Thank all of you
Thank
who
you.
hung out and for the whole hour plus to hang out and ask questions and be part of the conversation. We really appreciate it. If you are watching this as a replay and you have a question, please do put it in the comments. I try to keep an eye on those, and I can we can message KT about if you've got a question for him. Yeah, that would be very awesome if you want to join the conversation. So thank you, everybody, and good night.
Thank you so much.